Today's moment in Black history is all about the Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray. Dr. Murray was a civil rights advocate and a huge proponent for women's rights. She coined the term Jane Crow, alluding to the laws of Jim Crow and how they doubly impacted women. They graduated top of their class from Howard University and was offered a very hefty scholarship to Harvard University until it was found out that they were a woman. At that point, the scholarship was revoked, and Pauli organized a massive campaign to shame Harvard for their decisions. That did not stop Pauli from achieving their dreams of becoming a lawyer, and Pauli became the very first African-American person to receive a Doctor of Judicial Science from Yale Law School. Pauli was born in Baltimore, Maryland in 1910. Unfortunately, their mother passed away when they were 3, and their father was unable to take care of them and the siblings. And so Pauli and the rest of her siblings were sent to live in North Carolina with her mother's sisters. Unfortunately, when she was 13, he was taken to an asylum and unfortunately had an episode while he was there and lost his life because of a white guard. Now an orphan, Pauli moved around with different relatives in order to have the best chance of getting the education that they wanted. Pauli graduated from high school in 1927 and started going to Hunter College after they had been turned away from Columbia University on the basis of being a woman. Pauli excelled in written expression and graduated with a bachelor's degree in English. Pauli desperately wanted to continue their education, but the Great Depression was in full swing, and so going to another university at this time was really not in the books. But she did take night classes and learning more about philosophy. A lot of those things centered on Marxism and communism, and she was just trying to figure out like the things outside of her realm. She was at the time working with a New Deal organization for women. It was very similar to the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, but for women. While she was there, she met Eleanor Roosevelt, and they had actually a pretty decent, back and forth throughout their life. But anyhow, the director of the she, as it was called, found one of her Marxist books, and she was encouraged to leave, which she did, and she hitchhiked her way back home. She decided to apply for a PhD program in sociology at UNC Chapel Hill, but she was rejected on the basis of her race, which would have been the case at pretty much every other university in the South because of segregation. Pauli engaged in a massive letter writing campaign, writing to just about everybody she could, newspapers. She even wrote to the president. She wrote to the NAACP because she was trying to shame people into integration. The NAACP was fairly interested in their case at first. However, Pauli didn't really fit the norm of who they were trying to publicize. And so her case was not picked up by the NAACP, and she was not able to enter the university at the time. She traveled around a little bit, made her way to New Jersey, had some time in Rhode Island, came down to Virginia, just trying to figure out her place. While she was there in Virginia, she and a friend were riding on a bus that happened to be segregated, and they sat down in the section of the bus that was reserved for white passengers. And instead of moving, Pauli just kind of thought about Gandhian civil disobedience, and they did not move. Pauli and her friend were both arrested, and when the NAACP refused to represent them, the Workers' Defense League, which was a socialist group, agreed to pay her court fees for her. After that, Pauli decided to start working with the WDL and started to tour the country to fundraise and bring awareness to violations of civil rights because of segregation or other issues throughout the country. She would even write to her friend Eleanor Roosevelt from time to time in order to kind of have the ear of someone with influence. And honestly, this sort of campaign that they worked on made them really close friends for the next 2 decades. Because of their work with this organization, Pauli decided that she needed to consider a legal career. First, Pauli went to Howard University, the law school. She was the only woman in her law class and became very, very aware of the sexist policies that were there. She called it the Jane Crow to the Jim Crow laws, that the fact that she was Black and a woman was more damning than anything else. In fact, on the very first day of law school, she was told by a professor that he didn't know why women even went to law school. Pauli was infuriated and determined to prove everyone wrong, and so she went on to graduate from the top of her class at Howard. For receiving this honor, she was given a fellowship scholarship to Harvard University, but as soon as they found out that Pauli was a woman, they rescinded the offer, even though Pauli had a letter from Franklin D. Roosevelt vouching for them. In protest, Murray wrote a response. "I would gladly change my sex to meet your requirements, but since the way to such a change has not been revealed to me, I have no recourse but to appeal you to change your mind. Are you telling me that one is as difficult as the other?" Unfortunately, Harvard refused to change their policies, and so instead, Pauli went to UC Berkeley and received their master's degree, writing a thesis called The Right to Equal Opportunity in Employment, which was discussing the equality of the workplace for women. After graduation, she joined the California Bar and became the very first Black Deputy Attorney General in California. She continued to work with different activist groups focusing on the rights of African American people, but especially of women and African American women in particular. Always very outspoken in the civil rights movement, she stood toe-to-toe with people like Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, urging society to see the exhausting labor that Black women had to perform in order to keep the civil rights movement standing. Pauli firmly held that the determination of the civil rights movement rested on the unwavering shoulders of Black women, and they deserved respect. In 1950, Murray published States' Laws on Race and Color, which was basically a look at state segregation in different places throughout the nation. This book kind of challenged the norm of arguing that segregation violated separate but equal in Plessy versus Ferguson, but instead that it should be unconstitutional just because it denied people of equal rights in the 14th Amendment. Thurgood Marshall, who was a lawyer for the NAACP at the time, refers to Pauli's book as the Bible of civil rights movement, and it really did change the way that they began to look at case law surrounding the integration movement. Because of Pauli's book, Brown versus Board of Education was a success. Without those tactics, it might not have gone off as well as it did. The attention she got from this philosophy caught the eye of President John F. Kennedy in 1961. Pauli was appointed to the Presidential Commission on the Status of Women. She continued to advocate that the 14th Amendment did not just protect people based on race, but also should protect people based on sex. She continued to lobby for the rights of women and went to Yale University, where she was the first African American person to get her Juris Doctorate. Unwavering in her insistence that Black women get the due they deserved for their work in the civil rights movement, Pauli said, "What is often called exceptional ability is nothing more than persistent endeavor." And they persisted in their fight until they passed in 1985.